Ladies and gentlemen, every generation faces a crossroad where history and destiny collide. We are not merely observers of events, we are participants in the unfolding drama of nations. When you look at the landscape of America today, you must ask yourself one sobering question: are we witnessing the preservation of a dream or the collapse of an empire? History is not an old story, it is a mirror. When you study the rise of Adolf Hitler, you discover that nations do not fall in one night. They decay silently through the erosion of values, through the intoxication of pride, through the blindness of citizens who refuse to discern the times. Germany did not wake up one morning under tyranny. It gradually surrendered to the seduction of nationalism, the rhetoric of strength, and the promise of greatness while quietly forfeiting its soul. Now consider America, a nation birthed in the idea of liberty, founded upon principles of justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. But today, her foundations are shaking. Division has replaced unity, truth has been traded for propaganda, and fear has become the loudest preacher in the public square. And in moments like these, charismatic figures rise. Leaders emerge who speak not to the higher calling of humanity, but to the anger, the fear, and the frustrations of the masses. Donald Trump is not the issue, he is the symptom. He is a reflection of the spirit of a nation in crisis. People do not follow leaders because of who the leader is. They follow because of what the leader represents in their hearts. When a nation feels abandoned, insecure, or humiliated, it will cling to anyone who promises restoration, no matter the cost. That was Hitler's advantage in Germany. And that is the warning sign for America today. The fall of a nation is never external first, it is always internal. Armies cannot defeat a country whose moral compass is intact. But when corruption erodes the conscience, when greed robs the vision, when power becomes more important than principle, the seeds of destruction are already sown. Ask yourself what destroys a people. It is not bombs. It is not invasions. It is the decay of values, the worship of personality, and the rejection of truth. When the citizens begin to prefer entertainment over enlightenment, when they elevate leaders instead of holding them accountable, when they choose to be ruled rather than governed, then collapse is inevitable. But let me tell you this, America's fall is not guaranteed, because decline is not destiny. Collapse is not compulsory. The question is not whether Donald Trump is like Hitler, but whether the American people will repeat the mistake of Germany. Will they choose a voice that feeds their fears over one that fuels their vision? Will they embrace leaders who divide or leaders who unite? Will they protect the dream, or will they watch it dissolve into the nightmare of history? The warning of history is clear. No nation is too great to fall. Rome fell, Egypt fell, Babylon fell, Germany fell. If America ignores the lessons, she too can fall. But if she remembers her calling, if she returns to her values, if she raises leaders of character, vision, and integrity, then her best days are not behind her, they are still ahead. So the question remains, is this the fall of America? Or is this the moment America wakes up to her true destiny? The answer is not in Donald Trump. The answer is not in Hitler. The answer is in the heart of the American people. You said history is a mirror, not a story. Nations repeat what they refuse to learn. When you hold history in your hands, you are not merely reading about past events, you are staring into a reflection of humanity's repeating cycles. The stories of kingdoms and empires are not distant tales buried in dusty pages. They are warnings written for those who live today. The same seeds that caused the rise and fall of nations in centuries past still exist in the soil of every country, and when they are watered by ignorance, arrogance, and neglect, they bear the same fruit of destruction. History is not neutral. It speaks, it warns, and it teaches. But when a people choose to ignore the lessons of history, they condemn themselves to repeat its tragedies. The reason history repeats itself is not because time is circular, but because human nature is consistent. Power tempts every generation. Pride blinds every society. Division corrodes every nation. What Germany faced in the 1930s is not locked in that decade. It is present wherever people hunger for strong men more than strong values. The rise of Adolf Hitler was not simply about one man's ambition. It was about a society's willingness to embrace rhetoric that appealed to fear and anger while dismissing the quiet wisdom of caution. The people did not see the danger because they thought themselves unique, different, immune from the mistakes of others. Yet history has no favorites. It deals with every nation in the same way. When you neglect its warnings, you inherit its consequences. Consider how nations often teach their citizens the glory of their victories, but hide the shame of their failures. Students memorize the names of conquerors, but rarely study the collapse of civilizations. They recite patriotic songs, but seldom wrestle with the moral compromises that erode greatness. And so each generation grows up with selective memory, repeating the same mistakes their ancestors made, thinking their downfall will be different. But history has never spared a nation because of wealth, technology, or influence. Rome fell at the height of its power, not because of external invasion alone, but because internal corruption made it vulnerable. Babylon's walls were high, but its arrogance was higher, and its fall was inevitable. When you look at America today, you must see more than current events. You must look into the mirror of history. Division, polarization, moral compromise, and the elevation of personality over principle are not new. They are old patterns dressed in modern clothes. The language of versus them, the weaponizing of truth, the obsession with power, and the dismissal of accountability all echo the pathways of fallen empires. Yet, so many believe America is too strong to collapse, too exceptional to decline, too advanced to fall prey to the errors of the past. That was the same illusion Germany believed. That was the same illusion Rome embraced, and that was the same illusion Babylon carried until the writing appeared on the wall. The mirror of history does not lie. It shows us that leaders are often the products of the people's desires. When societies crave entertainment over enlightenment, they elevate entertainers as rulers. When they crave wealth without work, they embrace corruption disguised as prosperity. When they crave identity without integrity, they empower voices that divide rather than unite. The people get the leaders that reflect their own hearts, and when those hearts are broken, bitter, or blinded, history simply repeats its old story through new faces. To understand history as a mirror is to understand responsibility. A mirror does not show you what you want to see, it shows you what you are. If you refuse to confront what is in the mirror, you are doomed to stumble in ignorance. This is why history is not entertainment, it is instruction. It is not just a record, it is a revelation. It is not about the past, it is about the present and the future. Every war, every revolution, every collapse, every rise is a prophetic echo telling us, if you continue down this path, you will end where others ended. The tragedy of nations is not that they did not have warnings, but that they ignored them. Prophets cried out in ancient times, historians wrote in modern times, and yet humanity chooses forgetfulness because remembering requires humility. To admit that another nation's fall could become your own is to admit that you are not invincible. To confess that history's warnings apply to you is to acknowledge that greatness is fragile. But when pride blinds a people, they laugh at the mirror, they silence the teachers, they mock the historians, and they rush headlong into the same destiny as those who came before them. Leaders like Trump or Hitler are not the problem, they are reflections of the people's condition. When a nation begins to search for a savior outside of its values, it opens the door for leaders who mirror its fears, frustrations, and hidden desires. A leader never rises in isolation, they rise because a society calls them forth. The masses may not consciously say it, but their silence, their compromise, and their hunger for answers create an atmosphere that shapes the kind of person who will step into power. In this way, leadership is less about the individual and more about the collective spirit of a nation. If you study Hitler, you will realize he was not created in a vacuum. He rose out of Germany's wounds after World War I. When the nation was humiliated, its economy collapsed, and its pride shattered. The people felt abandoned, betrayed, and desperate for hope. And when desperation rules a nation, discernment disappears. The German people did not simply follow Hitler because of his charisma. They followed him because he spoke to their pain. His words fed their anger, and his promises healed their pride. But what they embraced as healing became poison. Hitler was a reflection of what the people were feeling inside, a mirror of their desire for strength and revenge. He was the embodiment of the national mood. When you turn your eyes to modern America, you see a similar pattern. Donald Trump did not create division in America. He revealed it. He did not invent fear, anger, or distrust. He tapped into it. His voice found resonance because millions of people were already feeling the frustration he articulated. The cries of the forgotten, the resentment of the overlooked, and the bitterness of those who felt betrayed by political institutions were already there. Trump did not plant the seed, he watered it. He became the reflection of a society struggling with its own identity, torn between its ideals and its realities. The danger of this reality is that people often personalize what is really systemic. They point to the leader as the source of the problem, when in fact the leader is only the visible manifestation of an invisible condition. Removing the leader does not solve the problem, because the deeper issue is embedded in the hearts of the people. Nations produce the leaders they deserve. If the people are selfish, they will elevate selfish leaders. If the people are corrupt, they will tolerate corruption at the highest level. If the people hunger for division, they will empower voices that divide. A leader is simply a national mirror. This is why true change never comes by replacing one person with another. It comes when the people themselves are transformed. If the soil of society is toxic, every leader that grows from it will carry the same poison. Leaders do not change nations by themselves. They express what the people already are. The cries of "Make America Great Again" were not about one man's idea. They were about the collective yearning of a society feeling left behind. Just as Hitler's calls for national pride were not about one man's dream, but about the collective humiliation of a people desperate to restore their dignity. When we fail to understand this principle, we risk repeating history's worst mistakes. We demonize leaders without addressing the conditions that birthed them. We blame individuals while ignoring the environment that empowered them. We look at the tree while forgetting the soil. But no tree grows without roots, and no leader rises without people. The leader is always the fruit. The people are always the roots. And if the roots are unhealthy, the fruit will always carry the same disease. This is why history shows us that removing one dictator does not guarantee freedom. When Saddam Hussein fell, chaos followed. When dictators in Africa or Latin America were overthrown, new leaders often rose who carried the same spirit. The people cheered the fall of one, only to later cry under the rise of another. Why? Because the heart of the people never changed. The soil remained the same, so the fruit repeated itself. Until a nation deals with its inner sickness, it will always produce leaders who reflect it. Trump, like Hitler, represents a deeper truth. The state of leadership is the state of the people. Leaders emerge because of demand, not supply. If the people demand integrity, integrity rises. If the people demand truth, truth rises. If the people demand unity, unity rises. But if they demand anger, anger rises. If they demand division, division rises. And if they demand personality over principle, they will always get rulers who serve their emotions rather than their destiny. The fall of any nation begins internally. Values erode before empires collapse. No empire in history has ever been destroyed by external enemies until it first decayed from within. Armies may march across borders, bombs may fall from the sky, but these are only the final acts of a drama that began long before. The true collapse of nations always starts silently, subtly, and spiritually. It begins when the foundations of morality are neglected, when principles are compromised, and when a society trades integrity for convenience. What looks strong on the outside can be hollow on the inside, and eventually the cracks reveal themselves. Rome was not defeated by barbarian tribes alone. It was defeated by its own corruption, its obsession with pleasure, its neglect of discipline, and its abandonment of values that once made it great. The marble halls of its senate were filled with rhetoric but empty of righteousness. The city was rich, but the soul of the empire was poor. Babylon was not conquered because its walls were weak. It was conquered because its arrogance blinded it to danger. Its leaders partied while enemies surrounded the city. The handwriting on the wall was not about external enemies. It was about internal decay. Every fallen empire tells the same story. The enemy on the outside is never more dangerous than the enemy within. When values erode, everything else eventually follows. Justice is compromised, truth is diluted, leadership becomes transactional, and society becomes addicted to entertainment instead of enlightenment. Citizens become more concerned with their comfort than their character, and nations begin to celebrate what they should condemn while condemning what they should celebrate. Slowly, the lines between right and wrong blur until morality itself becomes relative, and once morality is relative, survival becomes the only principle left. A nation without values is a ship without a compass, drifting aimlessly until it crashes. In America today, this erosion can be seen clearly. Division has replaced dialogue, corruption has replaced accountability, and power has become more important than principle. When truth itself becomes negotiable, when facts are redefined by political convenience, when leaders are no longer held to standards of integrity, the pillars of stability weaken. America's strength has never been its wealth or its weapons. It has been its values. Liberty, justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness were the cornerstones of its foundation. But when liberty is abused, when justice is unequal, when equality is ignored, and when happiness becomes selfish indulgence rather than collective well-being, the foundation begins to crack. The erosion of values is rarely recognized in the moment. It disguises itself as progress, as freedom, as independence from outdated traditions. But freedom without discipline is chaos, and progress without principle is regression. Nations often celebrate their advancement in technology, economy, and influence while ignoring the decay of their moral fabric. Yet history proves that no amount of external advancement can preserve a nation that has lost its internal compass. Rome built roads and aqueducts. Babylon built palaces and temples, but neither could survive when their values crumbled. The heart of a nation is measured not by what it produces, but by what it protects. When a nation protects its integrity, it flourishes. When it protects only its image, it declines. Leaders may proclaim greatness, economies may boast numbers, but if corruption spreads unchecked, if families are broken, if communities are divided, then greatness is a fat aid. It is only a matter of time before the weight of internal decay collapses the structure. The fall of nations begins in small compromises. A little dishonesty tolerated in leadership, a little injustice ignored in the courts, a little greed excused in business, a little apathy embraced by citizens. These little cracks become gaping holes. A culture that normalizes lies cannot sustain truth. A system that rewards corruption cannot sustain justice. A people who celebrate immorality cannot sustain virtue. Every small compromise weakens the pillars until one day the roof caves in. History does not lie. Every fallen empire testifies that the enemy within is always greater than the enemy without. A nation can survive attacks. It can recover from disasters. It can rebuild after wars. But it cannot endure when its soul rots from within. And when values erode, collapse is no longer a matter of if, but when. Personality-driven politics is dangerous. Principles, not personalities, preserve nations. When nations place more trust in the charisma of leaders than in the character of leadership, they open themselves to deception. Charisma can captivate, but character sustains. Personalities can inspire, but principles protect. Throughout history, nations that elevated personalities above principles found themselves enslaved to the very leaders they celebrated. A leader's charm may ignite crowds, but it is principles that anchor societies through storms. Without principles, even the most eloquent voices lead people astray, and nations become like ships guided not by compass, but by the waves of emotion. The danger of personality-driven politics lies in its ability to blind people to truth. When citizens become more attached to who a leader is than what a leader stands for, they surrender their power of discernment. They no longer ask the right questions. They stop measuring actions against values and begin excusing behavior because of loyalty to an image. Leaders become idols, and when leaders are idolized, accountability is destroyed. Nations then find themselves manipulated not by truth, but by spectacle, swayed not by justice, but by charisma. Hitler's rise is perhaps the most tragic example of this. His speeches electrified crowds, his confidence stirred hope, and his promises resonated with a broken nation. Yet beneath the surface, his principles were rooted in hatred, division, and destruction. Because the people were captured by personality, they ignored the poisonous principles. They followed a voice rather than testing the values behind it, and in the end, they sacrificed freedom for the illusion of strength. The danger was not only in Hitler's ambitions, it was in the people's willingness to prioritize personality over principle. When you examine modern politics, you see the same seduction at work. Leaders are marketed like celebrities. Campaigns focus on image, style, and slogans rather than substance. Citizens are drawn to who can command the stage rather than who can uphold justice. A leader who makes people feel heard, strong, or represented is often embraced regardless of whether their principles align with truth. The power of personality is that it makes people feel something, but feelings are fleeting. Principles, on the other hand, remain constant even when they challenge emotions. A nation sustained by feelings will always shift with the wind, but a nation built on principles will endure through generations. Principles are the bedrock of stable governance. Justice, equality, truth, integrity, accountability. These are the invisible pillars that hold up the visible structure of a nation. Leaders come and go, personalities rise and fade, but principles outlive them all. When a nation elevates principles above personalities, it remains strong regardless of who occupies the highest office. But when personalities eclipse principles, the entire system becomes fragile because the strength of the nation is tied to the flaws of one individual. When that individual falls, the nation falls with them. The temptation to follow personalities often grows strongest in times of crisis. When people are fearful, desperate, or angry, they crave a figure who appears strong enough to lead them out. They do not search for principles. They search for saviors. They look for someone to carry their burdens, to voice their frustrations, to restore their pride. But no leader, no matter how charismatic, can replace the need for principles. Without principles, the leader's promises eventually betray the people who trusted them. This is why the most dangerous leaders are not those who openly oppose a nation's values, but those who appear to embody them while secretly undermining them. Personality can disguise corruption, arrogance, and ambition. Crowds cheer, applause fills arenas, media headlines amplify the image. But in the shadows, principles are compromised. When truth is redefined by loyalty to a person, when justice bends to protect power, when integrity is sacrificed to preserve image, the nation has already surrendered its foundation. The preservation of nations depends not on the greatness of leaders, but on the greatness of principles. Leaders are temporary custodians. Principles are eternal guardians. Nations that understand this hold their leaders accountable to values that transcend personality. Nations that forget this give leaders unchecked power, and unchecked power always leads to tyranny. The measure of a strong people is not how much they adore their leaders, but how firmly they demand that those leaders submit to principles higher than themselves. America's future depends not on one leader, but on whether her people choose fear or destiny. Every nation comes to a defining moment where the path diverges into two directions. One paved with fear, the other illuminated by vision. Fear is always the easier path because it demands nothing but reaction. Fear feeds on anger, on insecurity, on suspicion of others. It thrives in division and grows stronger when people believe the worst about their neighbors. Fear convinces citizens that survival requires surrendering freedom, that safety requires sacrificing values, that greatness can be achieved by excluding rather than embracing. When a nation chooses fear, it builds walls instead of bridges, it arms itself with suspicion rather than truth, and it lives by protecting itself from imagined enemies rather than pursuing its higher purpose. Destiny, on the other hand, calls a nation to something greater than itself. Destiny is not about what feels safe in the moment, but about what fulfills the original vision of the nation. America was never meant to be defined by fear. Its founding ideals were rooted in liberty, justice, equality, and opportunity. These were not promises to a select group. They were declarations of a higher destiny. When America chooses destiny, it chooses to align itself with these eternal values rather than the shifting winds of political personalities. Destiny demands courage because it often asks people to rise above their pain, to resist the temptation of bitterness, and to embrace a future larger than their present struggles. The tension between fear and destiny has always been part of America's story. Fear justified slavery, while destiny inspired abolitionists. Fear fueled segregation, while destiny gave birth to the civil rights movement. Fear silenced women, while destiny opened doors for their voices. Every time America stood at the crossroads, fear sought to preserve comfort, while destiny demanded transformation. The greatness of America has never been in choosing the easy path of fear, but in those moments when it chose destiny, even when the cost was high. Leaders often amplify whichever path the people lean toward. A fearful people will elevate leaders who speak the language of fear, who point fingers, who divide citizens into us and them. A people of destiny will raise up leaders who call them higher, who remind them of their values, who challenge them to see beyond themselves. This is why the responsibility for America's future cannot be placed on one man or one office. Leaders may influence the direction, but the people determine the foundation. A leader is a reflection, but the heart of the people is the decision maker. If the people choose fear, then even the best leader will struggle to lift them. If the people choose destiny, then even flawed leaders will be compelled to rise to higher standards. Fear reduces a nation to survival mode, where every decision is made in reaction to threats, whether real or perceived. It shrinks vision, it suffocates creativity, and it blinds citizens to opportunities. Destiny, however, expands vision, fuels creativity, and reveals possibilities where others see impossibility. Fear imprisons the future, destiny releases it. Fear divides communities by convincing them that resources are scarce and must be hoarded. Destiny unites communities by reminding them that abundance is created when people work together. The choice between fear and destiny is not abstract. It shows up in everyday life. It is seen in how citizens treat one another across political, racial, and cultural divides. It is revealed in whether truth is defended even when inconvenient or sacrificed for the comfort of lies. It is exposed in whether people fight to protect only their own interests or whether they work to ensure justice for all. Fear narrows the circle of concern, destiny widens it. Fear says, protect me and mine. Destiny says, protect the vision for all. The true test of a nation is not how it responds in prosperity, but how it responds in crisis. In times of uncertainty, the temptation to choose fear is strong. But history has shown that nations that surrender to fear lose their soul, while nations that choose destiny leave legacies. America is now in such a moment where the voices of fear grow louder, where division tempts the heart, where survival seems more attractive than sacrifice. Yet within this moment lies the possibility of greatness if the people will remember who they are and why they exist.